we're back for one more episode of Voices of CX Off the Cuff. And today we'll be discussing content strategy and how to be customer-centric with the stuff that you're putting out there. So I am joined by Worthix head of content, Steve Berry. Hey, Steve.
Hello.
And Steve will help me dissect and dive deeply into a podcast episode that I recorded a little while ago with one of my favorite content marketers, Melanie Deziel. Right?
Yeah, and Melanie's episode was one of those that really was most relevant to my area, especially as I got started at this job. That was one of the main things I was doing, which was content creation and content marketing, mostly for inbound, which is we wanted to bring people to us rather than going out and trying to reach them. So it was really important to have our content to where it was reflective of our brand, but also useful.
Yeah. Melanie considers herself a storyteller above all, right? Is storytelling something that's important to you when you're doing your job?
Absolutely. And one of the main things that we've been trying to do more and more lately, especially because we've transitioned from, instead of being 100% inbound, is account-based marketing strategy. Mm-hmm. We want to go after specific clientele. And to do that, we really need to get not only our story across, but we also need to have an understanding of their story and what it is that we bring to the table that makes us useful to them.
And we have to be a lot more aware of the pains that are specific to the industries that we are writing for in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that's helped you widen your perspective on the industry as a whole since you've had to be that much more empathetic with your content production?
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge that any content creator has to face is they have to understand their audience. They have to recognize what are their pains, what are they trying to achieve, short term and long term, and how are you going to communicate that you understand that most of all, but also provide a resource that enables them to do that job the way they want to.
What do you think for you has been the biggest motivator to change your style of writing and write more specifically towards industries? Have you seen results? Is this something that you feel is tangible?
Our content that's more industry focused, especially when it clicks with our readers, it seems to do a lot better. So we've had certain blog articles that were more specific to like the auto industry or the healthcare industry. They seem to do a lot better than articles that are broader in most cases. Mm-hmm. There's a couple, of course, that are really CX focused, mm-hmm. which as an industry is growing. I almost want to say hitting market saturation because everyone is doing CX. There is no company out there that isn't. And market saturation has become a concern. Those articles don't do quite as well, but once they track for SEO, once an article in general tracks for SEO, it can go through the ceiling.
Mm. But there's a difference between it getting a lot of views or a lot of reads and it actually having the power to convert, right? So getting that reader to either dig deeper and sign up for your material or actually even raise their hand to request a demo, right? So as a content producer, what is it that you're establishing as your goal? Is it to cast the widest net and reach the largest public possible, hoping that it's a numbers game and ultimately you'll get people to convert? Or is it to reach a smaller or more narrow audience with a higher conversion potential?
Yeah. And as far as the audience goes, yes, we do want to, at the beginning of the funnel, we want to cast a wide net and get people aware that we exist. This is the classic content marketing funnel, which is you start with the wide end at the very top, and then you eventually filter down to the bottom end of the funnel where your ideal customer profile is. And for us, that number is relatively small because we're a B2B software company. Our market is not huge. There's only so many people that we can really sell to. So what we have to do is make sure that those people are aware of us and that they gradually come down the funnel to the point where they're ready to request a demo.
What is it for you that you consider a win with a piece of content?
It depends on the content type. In most cases, blogs are not really supposed to convert right away. They're supposed to get you down the funnel into the next piece of content, which in our case might be an e-paper, an ebook, or a webinar. Mm-hmm. So a win for a blog is maybe being seen a lot, being shared a lot, being sent around. and being engaged with. For a social post, a win might be engagement and click through. And for email, we want higher click through rates. 2 to 3% is a pretty typical open rate for us. If we're getting any higher than that, we're doing a good job. For the mid-funnel content, which is the e-papers and e-books, that's where we start looking more for the demo request, looking more for, did they book a meeting with a sales exec or an account executive?
Let's get into Melanie's content, because I want to kind of understand how this helps shape the strategy that you're applying to your job nowadays. What do you have for us to listen to?
We have, a 907.
907.
Oftentimes the question that I get, and I like the way you asked it, did it work? It worked for our goals, right? So our goal, again, was to get the attention of our audience and to help them see that these were real issues. So we looked at signals like engagement. We know that the piece was engaged with at an immensely high level. People were reading and sharing it. It actually appeared completely organically on the most emailed module on the homepage of the New York Times. So, listing the articles that were emailed around the most. So it earned its way into that top 10 spot, which tells us our audience liked it the same level that they like a lot of our editorial content. So that was a huge compliment. Again, we had really positive feedback from our audience. We had a lot of coverage in the industry press about, what we had created and how it was different. So all of those things signaled to us that we were getting attention and we were changing minds, and really reaching our readers. So in that way, it worked. Sometimes the question I get instead is, how many subscriptions did you get? Or how many people signed up for Netflix? Or how many people watched the show? And I'll tell you the truth, I don't know, because we weren't being asked to achieve that. That was not our key performance indicator. It was not our goal in this case. And I think in many cases, that kind of strictly conversion focused goal can really lead you down a path of creating content that your audience doesn't actually want. Nobody wakes up and says, I can't wait to be converted today, or I can't wait to be sold to today. So taking that softer approach of showing instead of telling, I think it just creates a much deeper relationship with the audience, both for the publishing partner you might be working with or on your own properties, if you're talking to them through your blog or your social channels.
Interestingly, we just touched on that subject ever so slightly. So what I'm hearing her saying is that while we do need to track results because we're writing for a purpose, we can't fall into the trap of only writing for conversion. Because when you do that, if you do it too frequently, you'll lose the interest of your readers and you'll no longer hold a place of value. And that's it. So not only did you maybe convert here or there, but in general, you're going to lose your audience. Is that it?
Yeah. And we've been finding this more and more, which is we need to be able to get the audience's attention in a way that's not clearly just for marketing's sake. We need the audience to be able to put themselves in our shoes. And I think there was no better example of that than when we started this campaign we're putting out on LinkedIn, which is about your soon-to-be infamous wet towel story, which, to give you a little background on where that started, I found buried in our old, I don't even know if it was HubSpot or was it?
It was an old HubSpot post.
Yeah, it was like a super old HubSpot post. And I found it and I was like, we've never published this. This is a fantastic story. If you don't know about the wet towel story, we'll provide a link. But it's worth a listen. You want to summarize?
I've told this story so many times at this point. Essentially, it has to do with us trying to relay to an executive the importance of looking at feedback impact as opposed to feedback frequency. My husband and I were newlywed at the time, and he had this horrible habit of putting his towel on my side of the bed after getting out of the shower every day. And it drove me crazy. And this went on for a really, really long time. And I would break down and scream and pull out my hair and everything. It was a goddamn towel, I don't know what. So the example that we used was, even though my wife complains every single day about that wet towel, even though it might be the number one most frequent complaint, she's never going to leave me over a wet towel. Now, if she were to, on a single occasion, catch me in bed with another person, then that would absolutely lead to divorce. So when it comes to your customers, you need to try to identify what the wet towel is. In other words, something they may complain about often, but will never actually drive them to make the decision to leave you. And it's also equally as important to find out what they're finding your spouse in bed with someone else is, understanding what the deal breakers are for your customers and what they won't tolerate from you. Because then you'll just have a much clearer idea or path on which areas of your organization you need to invest in first and which ones take precedence over others. It's more important to tackle deal breakers than it is to tackle high frequency but low impact. So that's the wet towel story.
And the reason I like that story so much is because having known both of you personally, I got a real kick out of being able to really put myself in there. And my whole reasoning for bringing that back to the surface was like, this is a really good personal story that serves multiple purposes. It tells our brand's key value proposition that companies just absolutely need something that's clear that they can grasp easily. I think the wet towel story accomplished that. It also gave them a little glimpse of your personal life.
Yeah, but that's kind of interesting, Steve. It's interesting that you brought that up because that does really portray something that I feel very strongly about. And I try bringing this leadership to the team, which is people think that it's inappropriate to bring up personal stories in a business context. And I disagree with that entirely because people are people and people follow and listen to other people, not to companies. Nobody gives a crap about companies. They don't care what a company thinks. They care what the people behind that company think. They care what the people behind that company believe in and are fighting for. So when you're able to connect a human on this side to a human on that side and create that personal connection, that is where you accomplish things. That is where you get messages across. That's where you generate interest. It's not interesting to hear about what a company's doing, but to understand what the people behind that company are doing, what they care about, what their values are, what their morals are, what their pains are. That's what's actually interesting to people. So I believe strongly in creating that identification with the person on the other side. For you, how important do you think that this whole idea has been in shaping the way that you write? The idea of storytelling, of personal storytelling.
Personal storytelling has been, well, let me walk back a little bit here because that's kind of my background, which is as a writer, I was mostly in high school and up through college, I was mostly invested in fiction writing and fiction reading. So what gets you invested in a fiction is not necessarily the events taking place, which, the parallel to that in our case would be what's the company doing? We're not necessarily interested in that as much as we're interested in the characters going through it. Mm-hmm. And in this case, we are the characters. We're the people trying to get this company going and put things in motion. Being able to get people invested in our story more than what the company is doing is kind of the goal with that sort of storytelling. And oddly enough, Melanie Deziel does talk about this at one point, which is where, being able to get the human story in there is super important. You don't necessarily want to put yourself at the center of that personal story. Obviously, we take a bit of a middle approach to that, which is where, yes, we do involve ourselves in the story, but we feel like it's not that big a faux pas anymore. It's not completely taboo to put our own story out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to play that clip right now. I remember it from when we recorded it. It was specifically related to a brand that's constantly referring to themselves about everything and how that may tire people.
I think there are ways you can certainly bring a storyteller mindset into those things. So one of the things that I always suggest is finding the human element, right? So that's one thing that journalists know how to do really well. Bringing in new faces, bringing in different voices, bringing in different perspectives, putting a person at the center of your story. So if we think about launching a new product, rather than just listing off a bunch of features and benefits, which no one's going to copy paste and write about if that's your goal, find a customer who's used that service or product, who it's made a significant difference in their life, who can speak freely and openly and honestly about the transformational impact it has had for them. That's way more compelling than just a list of features and benefits, by having that human story in there. Now, it may not, like I said, it may not be a work of art. It may just be a matter of describing this person's business and having them share a few authentic quotes, but it's just going to be so much better. It's going to resonate with people so much more because it's a human, and again, not yourself. You are human, but don't use yourself as the human in your stories. Try to find other voices that you can bring in. I think that's one really easy way to do it.
So the idea is that almost in testimonial format, but instead of a testimonial, building a story around people who interact with your company and your brand. Is that it?
Yeah, and I think it's a very good next step
Yeah.
for what we need to do.
I know,
because
right? I'm sitting here like, yeah, we should do this. It's great to listen to podcasts or listen to people that when they speak, it's almost like your mind starts running and you start coming up with ideas of how to implement that. And that's kind of the objective of what we're doing here with this off the cuff season. We're finding those practical applications, right? Of the stuff that Melanie got into in this podcast, what was your favorite bit? I could tell you my favorite bit, but I think I'm going to wait just in case it's the same thing.
My favorite bit? We've sort of touched on it already, which was the personal aspect and, you know, having a human as the hero of your story.
My favorite part of this, and actually what inspired me to reach out to Melanie and invite her onto the podcast to begin with, was I saw her speaking at Social Media Marketing World, and she described a content matrix, because one of the biggest problems that content producers have is coming up with content, the ideas, or that spark that gets you to write something, right? Creative block, writer's block is an actual thing, and getting stuck and not knowing what to write is something that we've been through a million times, right, Steve? Right. So Melanie actually developed a matrix where you can, with 10 separate ideas, build 100 pieces of content. Isn't that what it is? And she talks about this in the book that she recently launched. For me, that was such a deep pain that she's solving. So Melanie, as a content producer, understood the pain of her peers and created this amazing solution for it. And that's what I wanted to bring onto the show, so that we can understand how to build more with less and have that constant guide and eliminate so much effort that we spend. We still have brainstorming meetings, but it makes it that much easier when we know exactly what we're doing. Do you remember kind of how that content matrix works? Can you explain that a little bit?
I'm going to level with you on this one because we had every intention of starting to use that. I took one look at that content matrix, and because of the way my brain functions, I was just like, how do I even start to fill this in? Because the way I work is I set my sights on one idea and one goal that I want to achieve with that idea, whether that's, you know, write an e-paper, write a blog post, or what have you. And I try to focus single-mindedly on that one project. The purpose of the content matrix is to be able to list out all the different content types you could make with the same idea. That sort of happens naturally once we have that content built, once the core ideas are there. My focus is mainly on the copy or the scripting or the story, and less the format that it takes. Of course, we have to think about where we're putting this content out, and, you know, how to format the video such that it makes sense on that platform, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, what have you. But my focus is always more on the core message than it is about the format, because the format's easy. But if you want to reshape the video for a different platform, that's the easy part. I
want to go back to something that you addressed earlier on, which was the pivot that we had from putting less focus into creating new blog articles and shifting into producing material for our clients and our target audience specifically. Because I remember when we made that decision, it was motivated by the understanding that we needed to practice a little bit more what we ourselves preached, which was to keep your customer at the core of everything that you're doing. So when we were producing content that we believed the market wanted without actually checking with the market. And we did some research and we listened to our customers and we tried to identify what it was that they wanted. And one of the things that came up is they wanted things that were relevant to their industry, to their reality, to their pains. And that helped shift and even revolutionize the way we were making content here at the marketing team in Worthix, and tailor our message around these individuals. And one of the inspirations to this was having Sangram come in and record a podcast episode talking about how Terminus, which is the company that Sangram co-founded, worked towards building account-based marketing, and how absolutely crucial to them taking over the market with their methodology. And the understanding that if you are able to have a snipered approach to your customer as opposed to that wide net, so the fishing pole instead of the net, that you would have a much higher conversion, and ultimately it would be worth having to put out that extra effort into the research, into the understanding. And as a whole, I believe that account-based marketing is empathetic inbound marketing. Thoughts?
Absolutely true. And I think as far as transitioning to ABM, we've identified a few core industries that we serve the most, which in our case is auto, healthcare. Sorry, I've been doing a lot of editing lately. Auto, healthcare, finance, and
Retail.
Retail. Yeah, absolutely retail. I'm forgetting.
And hospitality.
Retail and hospitality. Yes, we lump them into one. So there's really 4 big ones. But we've been molding our content around those 4 so that we have a funnel leading all the way from our wide net blog posts all the way down to conversion at the very bottom. And we're kind of building out the middle pieces right now, which is where we have the blog post, we have the wide net, we need the middle, which is e-papers, ebooks, and more industry-specific stories or results that we've produced in the form of case studies. And then we're going to build out a landing page with all the resources available there. So that's one thing we have been focusing on a lot more lately.
And how has this transition been for you? It takes out a little bit of the mystery of having to think of what to write about, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Where you're writing a blog post from week to week, and you're really, at some point, just trying to fill time. You're just trying to fill space on your page. And it doesn't really convert. The viewer might learn something from it because we try to be as resource-based as possible with some of these things. Some of them are just opinion pieces because we were scrambling for time. And we were like religiously putting out a blog post every week. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. It was very inconsistent. So it was hard to justify that much effort every week because if you can't outsource these writing prompts consistently and get a consistent quality back, then you end up wasting a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of resources on something that's not really providing any return.
Yeah. I remember at the end of last year, one of the things that I was feeling and I wanted to apply to the team was around the absurd amount of information out there. There are so many blogs, there are so many CX authors. There's so much to be found that it feels, and like you said earlier, it really feels like we're nearing a point of saturation where, like, how many times can you give that same message over? And more importantly is that Worthix, we're vendors. How many people actually want to get their information from vendor blogs? When you go to a vendor blog, you immediately understand, if you've been in the market for any longer than 6 months, you understand that when you go to a vendor blog, there's a very specific reason why that content is there, and that ultimately you're going to end up falling into some drip where people are going to try to sell to you. So something was very discouraging for me about the way I was seeing content being produced by vendor blogs to begin with. And we felt like we needed to change. We felt like it was getting old. And I think that the whole team felt this. It was weighing heavy. We'd put out these articles and the end result was like, okay, it's technically good, but where's that feeling? What are we truly giving people when they finish reading this time? Because in my mind, when thinking of it from a reader perspective, you have all this work in getting material in front of somebody. And then they finally read it and they give you that, this 5-6 minutes of their time. When they're done, they have to leave with a feeling of self-improvement somehow. They have to feel like they extracted value. They gave us their time. We'd better give them something in return. And one of the things that I felt is that we were failing at that. Because even though there might be a message here or there, overall, there was nothing that was truly impacting readers to say, wow, this is shifting my paradigms. This is shifting the way that I look at the world. And that's something that we've been able to do when we focus on industry-specific problems, because we can provide solutions. It's a lot more tangible now because we can go straight to the crux of the problem and provide solutions.
Yeah, and especially with one of our most recent pieces, the CX glossary, we were trying as hard as we could to be resource-based. And when we provide content that anyone in the space, because it was pretty broad, it wasn't any industry specific, except, it was based on customer experience. It was CX heavy. We basically compiled a big list of terms that we've heard throughout the industry that anyone in the space is going to hear at some point or has probably heard already. And we said, hey, let's put a list together, let's compile it and let's package it and give it to our readers. And that got a lot of good feedback. That got a lot of really good engagement. And it's a handy resource you can just bookmark. So we want to be able to put together more content of that nature where it becomes a staple rather than just something that someone's going to read for, and you said 5-6 minutes. That's generous, to be honest. It ends up being more like 2 if they read, 2 seconds if they bounce. So if we're just going to have someone's attention for 2 minutes and then they go away anyway, it's like, well, might as well give them a resource on the way out.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into Melanie's last clip because we're running short on time. I've heard you make several analogies as well about how creating content is like dating. And there was one that talked about how it's really important to gift your readers somehow, deliver something of value to them so that they feel courted once again, right?
Yeah.
So part of that listening is also understanding what is valuable to them so that you can then act on that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I say the first step is really listening to your audience and not to get too deep into our multi-layered analogies here. But I guess it's like any relationship, right? Like it's give and take. You have to listen as well as respond. If you're only talking at someone, you're that guy at the party that only talks about himself and no one likes to hang around you for very long, right? They realize very quickly you don't need them for that conversation.
So creating content is like dating. And if you're always constantly talking about yourself, then the customer realizes that they don't have to be there in order for that conversation to happen. I love that line.
Yeah. And the give and take here is, of course, when you structure a piece of content and you want to do it for a specific audience or a specific industry, you have to do your research. You have to go and read up as much as you can. So to give content to them, you have to consume content or information from them. You can't just go in blind. And that's one of the things that was interesting to me, especially starting out, which is I was finding myself learning a lot about these industries just because I would spend hours just reading. It's the same idea. It's like if you want to be a writer, you just have to read as much as you can because you have to fill the tank up with something to get it going anywhere.
Yeah. You know what? I think that's my favorite part of this whole podcast episode right there. For you to write something for them, you have to read something from them. And that really does have to do with understanding your customer's individual needs and being customer-centric in your content production. So I commend you on that. I'm so glad you work with me. I'm so glad we're a team. So Steve, what are some final notes that you would give other content producers or content creators out there that are thinking of applying a little bit more empathy or customer centricity to their writing?
The first thing to understanding their pain is, of course, reading as much of their material as possible and then engage with them. And you have to put yourself in their shoes and figure out, okay, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis that is causing them to struggle, that is giving them day-to-day issues? How can I solve that? How does what I'm creating fix that problem? And then you communicate that. And that's, especially for a SaaS company like we are, that's one of the hardest things to get right is if you have a complicated value proposition, you have to distill it down in a way that's like elementary, like explain it like I'm 5, basically, and get it across in a way that they're like, wow, that would be really useful for me. So that, of course, is a constant challenge. But especially as a writer, that's one of the challenges that I really look forward to actually figuring out.
That's great. So your job is to distill all of that super complex technology and that solution and put it at an elementary level so that the customer or your reader can quickly identify how you can solve their pain. That's brilliant. That's great. Steve, thanks so much for coming on, from walking from your desk all the way into the podcast room to record this episode with me today.
It was a trip, especially after leg day.
Awesome. See you guys next time.